Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and today I want to recommend some of Oscar Wilde's works to you, especially if you're new to his writing. Wilde was an Irish-born and England-based author who lived from 1854 to 1900, but most of his works were written in the last decade of the 19th century. I have read all of his works in the past, and there are quite a few of them, so here are my recommendations for where to start. Really, it is all about which aspect of Wilde's writing you want to explore first. The interesting thing about Wilde, and something that sets him apart from other writers of the period, is that he dabbled a lot in different genres. He wrote poems, fairy tales, plays, both comedic and tragic. He wrote a single novel, essays, short stories. So where do you start reading this quite impressive catalogue? Well, he is best known as a playwright, so a play is a really good place to start, for example. His most popular comedy is The Importance of Being Earnest, and that's also my favourite play of his. It's a witty social comedy which involves the usual mix-ups, friends turn to enemies and enemies turn to friends. There's the unnatural attraction to a certain name. There's a dramatic backstory involving a sentimental novel and plenty of 19th century sexual innuendo. The main characters are a pair of dandies who are trying to seduce two women by pretending to be called Earnest, a chat-up tactic that surprisingly works. Unfortunately, they also need to deal with a very strict mother, a romantic governess with a bit of a history, and the two women themselves, who are both very headstrong and not willing to give up on the idea of marrying a real Earnest. It's a really fun play to read. Wilde's wit is as sharp as ever in this one, and it's not a very long play either, but I'm going to be controversial here and suggest that before you read the play, you actually watch it first. You might not have a local theatre performing The Importance of Being Earnest in your town, but luckily there have been some wonderful adaptations of it on film. As a millennial, I'm partial to the 2002 version, starring Rupert Everett, a sexy guitar-playing Colin Firth, quite a young Reese Witherspoon, and Dame Judi Dench, who absolutely steals every scene she's in. This version is really fun with some great music and great scenery. It's very fast moving as well, and it includes some scenes from a fourth act that was cut out of the original play at the last edit, and it actually makes the plot have a little bit more sense. Then, after you've seen the film, I suggest that you read the play straight away and you'll get even more enjoyment out of the little details in it, like the jokes that get picked up later in the plot or foreshadow some of the development. It's a very tightly written play and every line is exactly where it should be, so you're not going to get bored on a reread. If you then want more of Wilde's comedies, I would recommend An Ideal Husband, which is in the same line of romantic comedy with social commentary and just enough drama to make you care for the characters. However, instead of reading a play, you might prefer to read Wilde's only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. I should say that this is one of my all-time favourite novels, but at the same time, I don't think it's Wilde's greatest work. I feel like at times he struggled with the long format of the novel, and that its fame is partly due to it being his only novel. Nonetheless, this is worth reading, but it is very different from The Importance of Being Earnest. The one thing it has got in common is the beautiful language and writing style. Dorian Gray is the sort of novel where you want to read bits out loud and savour like poetry, or where you want to take quotes and then embroider them onto a cushion. The plot of this is fairly well known. It's a dark cautionary tale about a man who uses his own beauty to his advantage until it starts hurting those who love him. And by the end of the book, like in any good moral story, his sinful past catches up with him. The beauty of this novel does not lie in the plot or the moral aspect or even the gothic supernatural elements. For me, the appeal is in the style and in the dialogue and in the discussion on hedonism, aesthetics, morality, and how all of that ties up with class and wealth and power. The book actually most reminds me of Oscar Wilde's essays, which he wrote in the early 1890s, in which he expresses his ideas wrapped up in some really beautiful prose. The characters in this are ideas too. They are representative of a certain type of morality or a certain philosophical attitude. Especially the female characters, of which there are exactly two, are, I have to say, little more than one-dimensional caricatures of real human beings. So if you decide to read The Picture of Dorian Gray first, approach it not as a story about real people, but as a sort of long-form essay packed into an atmospheric narrative. As much as I've criticised the book here, it is one of my all-time favourite novels, and that is because it's so compellingly written that there's more beauty and more darkness to discover with every reread of it for me. So now we've discussed Wilde's two most well-known works. What else is there? Let's start with his poetry. For the most part, his poems are a bit rough around the edges, a bit sentimental and a bit one-dimensional. The one noteworthy exception for me is the Ballad of Reading Gaol. This is the only work Wilde wrote after his release from sad jail. Wilde's tragic biography is probably as famous as his biggest works, but in case you were unaware, Wilde spent 2 years doing hard labour in jail for breaking the laws against gross indecency, aka his affairs with other men. After his release, he wrote up the true story of one of his fellow inmates who was convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of his wife. This story he then turned into a very long narrative poem which, when you read it, feels a lot like a folk song. Like the rhythm and the flow of it carries you through this tragic tale of a murderer. It's a very musical poem, and I recommend that you either read it out loud or you listen to a wonderful reading by Rupert Everett, who actually performed it in today's Reading prison. The link to that reading is going to be in the description box. If you're not feeling the poetry, you might want to try Wilde's fairy tales. He published 2 collections of tales, and my personal favourite is the one called The Happy Prince and Other Tales. This is a collection of 5 short stories that are very much inspired by the structure of traditional folk tales, but done in a very Wilde, typical, arty, stylized way. They all have a very overt morality to them, sharp dialogue and aspects of the aesthetic movement, so the typical Wilde mix really. My favourite by far is a fun little tale called The Remarkable Rocket, which is the story of a firework rocket with a bit of an ego problem. Other good stories in this collection include The Nightingale and the Rose, which is very melodramatic and completely over the top in its emotionality and symbolism, but I still really love it. Then there's the title story, The Happy Prince, which is a bit like a Dickens-style tale of goodness and poverty, but again, fairly over the top and with random bits of sass from a sea-read. Really, The Happy Prince and Other Tales is, in my opinion, the one work by Oscar Wilde that is underrated, that I think needs more recognition and should be talked about more. And I think you should read the tales if you haven't already, and if you have an interest in fairy tales. This is a really short collection, so you'll be able to get through it fairly quickly. So, these were my suggestions for where to start with Wilde's work. I've left out some really important parts of his opus, like his tragic play Salome, which he wrote in French, because why not? Or his poetic letter De Profundis, the only work that he wrote while in prison. Or his collection of essays about art, culture and society. All of these are worth reading and worth exploring too, but this video is already long enough. So before I finish, I just want to recommend another video on his works by Cara from Wilde Book Garden. This really wonderful discussion with the title Oscar Wilde Appreciation and Recommendations lists all of her favourites and discusses some works that I haven't talked about in this video. And she goes into more detail about his life too. So I really recommend you check out that video. The link is in the description box. So let me know, have you read any of Wilde's works? Which ones are your favourites and your least favourites? And are there any that I haven't mentioned yet, but that you think would be a really good place to start with Wilde's works? Thank you very much for watching. Bye.